So I'm going to quickly just go through a couple of slides, and we'll go through them very rapidly just to provide a little bit of context before this demo here. And that's that, I really like this checklist here from SkySync, and we're going to go a little bit in a technology direction here because obviously, Data.World is a technology company with our data catalog and governance solution that, I think a lot of people when they approach thinking about compliance, they do at first think a lot about the front end of that problem, the sort of the consumer-facing part of that problem, and thinking about things like updating your privacy policy, potentially introducing, verification systems, opt-out buttons, things like that, that really allow end consumers to have more control over their data, more visibility, and the ability to do things like click that do not sell my data button. And those are all very critical. And then there's this bullet here of data governance, where a whole bunch of other stuff kind of gets piled in, and hopefully we can unpack that a little bit and help you understand what's really a part of that bullet point, and what does that imply that might be able to help you. And we'll do a super fast demo after we walk through a little bit of architecture, just to give you a taste of that, just the top of the iceberg. And then obviously, you can reach out to us for further demos and additional information. So when thinking about how technology is part of that overall people, process, and technology picture, there's obviously a bunch of different digital properties and business assets that you have, whether they're consumer-facing or they're more internal-facing. And usually, as part of addressing these different compliance needs, you're piecing together there's no silver bullet, it's not one technology, it's bringing together a variety of different tools and technologies to work in concert with each other. And I'll move through these kind of quickly here. An example is, you're collecting information usually about what your customers are doing, whether that's logging that you've created internally, or maybe you're using something like Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics, maybe a customer data platform like Segment.com or Telium, for example. And you're usually using some sort of identity management system to actually help you identify who these users are, right? Because at some point, typically they need to sign up, create a username and password, or maybe at least just sign up with their email address. And that way you at least have some sort of an identifier to tie to that person. And as we move into this environment where CCPA and GDPR are really critical to have that consent, allow consumers to manage their preferences, a lot of times there's some sort of a consent, preference, or privacy management solution in place, things like OneTrust or Data Grail, et cetera, that are being tied into those digital experiences and have business process workflows on the back end, so that when people say, hey, I want a copy of my data, you have a way to sort of manage that workflow and really have visibility into how well you're sort of managing those different business processes. Now, even with sort of having an identity management solution, you saw that bullet on identity verification on the previous slide. It's really important that you know who somebody is in order to be able to work with them on their subject access request, because if somebody asks, hey, can I have a copy of my data, and you give them a copy of that data, but you weren't 100% sure that you actually, that person was who they said they were, you were literally doing, the exact thing that the regulation was trying to prevent, right? And so these types of strong identity type solutions end up becoming potentially important as well. And these are all things sort of more on the front end, right? All of this information is getting stored in your various data systems, and that's where especially a data cataloging and governance solution can come to play, because now that you're answering some of these questions on the front end and helping empower the end user to have control, to have visibility, you do need to understand what is all the data that's being collected, where is it being placed, how can I sort of interact with that data in a safe way and actually have lineage to understand how it flows through my different data systems and how it's being utilized, and then have some sense of control over that, whether it's saying who can and can't access that information, being able to have the context of purpose and consent travel along as metadata through these different systems, and having the right visibility and audit capability to monitor that. A couple of additional points are, first of all, often we see companies invest in something like a compliance scanner. Tools like Integris or Ground Labs or Data Guys, these types of solutions can go at a very deep level and scan across not just sort of your data systems, which you would want to integrate with your data catalog, but also things like email and text messages and chat, and really provide sort of deep understanding of not just sort of the expected places where sensitive data might be living and being talked about, but also the unexpected places as well. And when you really bring all of these different elements together, that's when you can really effectively answer questions like, hey, how do I effectively respond to these different subject access requests? How do I, be able to make sure that I'm complying with the way that customers are consenting for data? And when they do say, hey, I need a copy of 12 months worth of data, that I know where it is, I know how to get it, and I can confirm that we've done it effectively. And we'll make this information available afterwards, so feel free to take a screenshot if you'd like, but also you can find this on our web resources. So when we think about data catalogs in CCPA, there's really 7 areas that we think can help, and we'll cover a couple of those as part of the demo. I'm just going to go ahead and animate them all out so you can see what they are. First of all, you got to have visibility and inventory over where your data is, where it lives, so that you can manage it. You can't manage what you can't see, and inventory is about visibility and understanding. Next is classification, and whether you're leveraging human or sort of more dictated processes, or you're leveraging machine learning and AI type approaches, you need to be able to organize and classify those assets to identify which ones are sensitive and maybe what types of sensitivity those different assets are. So that dictates then how policy will apply to those different things. If you're investing in some sort of a compliance scanning solution, which we definitely recommend at Data.World, how do you take that compliance scanning solution and extend its utility? And we really think that those types of solutions can be well integrated with a cataloging and governance solution for a really deep and broad type of solution to managing your metadata and where data lives and how it travels. Data lineage is all about understanding how data flows upstream and downstream, so that when upstream systems have issues, you can see what the downstream uses of that are, and when you're seeing sort of downstream uses, you know where it came from. That way you can remediate, and when you're doing those subject access requests, you know the different systems that you need to report in terms of where that data lives and how it's being used. Controlling things like data masking, so that when analytics folks are using that data, that you can block out the sensitive information, or even do anonymization that can't be reversed, which a lot of times these regulations require. Controlling who has access and managing those approval flows, and then finally, once again, that reporting and that ability to audit is really critical, so that way you can manage those over time and manage change effectively, because things are always changing, and so you need to constantly be sort of monitoring and auditing the metadata of everything that's happening across your environment. And so with that, I'm going to quickly hop over to Data.World and show you just a couple things to give you a taste of sort of how Data.World addresses that. First of all, when I go into Data.World, one of the things that you notice is that Data.World is a very collaborative and social type of catalog. A lot of people say that it feels like Facebook for data, and we really live that to heart. And combine that with a really powerful Google for data in terms of search and being based on a knowledge graph, and Amazon for data in terms of being able to securely but effectively shop for the right data assets, request access, and then gain access to those different things. And so one of the first critical elements is really having an inventory of all the data in your enterprise. And I can very quickly, with a catalog, be able to understand the different types of data that our organization has, the different ways that it's been organized and classified in our organization, and even browse and interact with that data in ways that make sense to the structure of our company, whether it's the finance data, it's the accounting data, and manage who has access to that based on who is an accountant and who has the right to access that type of data and which fields can they access. Another critical element is really around classification. And so if I use our search, not only can I search for things like the titles and the descriptions of different assets, but also based on the way that it's been classified. And so if I type in tag sensitive, for example, I can very quickly look through the data sets and the tables and the columns in my organization that are related to sensitive data, so that not only can I get a grip on what the risk is across my different sort of data environments, but also be able to, when I'm complying with those subject access requests, know which data assets I really need to be going to query and pull that information and provide an effective report to that end consumer. And just to show you an additional level of detail here, I can type in column phone, and now I'm looking at only assets that have a column called phone number. And so that level of granularity to go and look at underlying data sets and the columns and the types of data that they contain is critical to have that sort of both broad and deep understanding of where that data is being used and how it's being used. Another really critical element is being able to organize different things into what we usually talk about as the glossary. And for example, you can here see an example of an order, and an order will typically have some PII around the customer ID and some non-anonymized PII customer records fields. And as you heard Carol talk about, really these definitions around personal data is quite broad, and if you can use that information to identify somebody, or you can combine different elements together in order to understand something about somebody and identify them, that really does present itself as personal data, and it's important to define what that is, make it clear that this is a piece of information that's sensitive, and then actually map that to the underlying data assets that are potentially providing and exposing that sensitive information so that you're really connecting all the dots. In terms of connecting all the dots, lineage is another key aspect to that, and as part of Data.World, we really do provide a deep understanding with our advanced lineage module around how these different fields connect with each other. And so, for example, if we're looking at full name, here is an end chart that is in a report that is being used by our analysts, but we can use detailed lineage to actually trace how that full name goes through different systems and comes from certain sources, such as this Oracle database. And likewise, do it in the reverse direction when you're saying, hey, we realize that first name, last name here is sensitive. We're going to go ahead and redact that information, or we're going to anonymize it. Oh my, that's going to have a bunch of downstream impacts on a bunch of different reports and things like that. That impact analysis ends up being very critical as well when thinking about how our business reacts and responds to change around how we comply with these different regulations. Now, finally, just to wrap up the demo, I want to show you all sort of how we handle access control. I'm going to go ahead and let me move this control panel out of the way here. Move to a data set here where we can show you how, in a particular data set, we may provide some limited information, let's say some sample rows of a data, but you can see some of this is sensitive, so we might actually block those 3 tables from being shown to the customer and just show them, the redacted information, such as this phone number here. You can see it's been masked out. This is all about control over, as people are having that Amazon shopping-like experience, not to overexpose information, but still provide enough information to say, hey, this is the data that I need. I'm going to go ahead and request access and be able to sort of configure this form, which is fully configurable for our clients, so that you can really ask the questions that you need in order to manage the relationship between the consents that customers are providing with the purposes that are being applied to how that data is being used. Which, to wrap things up, really relates to this final slide here, which is that, you're asking these consumers for different consents. And this is an example of a default template of consents that come with PWIC, a popular customer data platform and a sort of privacy toolkit for your website, that based on those different sorts of consents and permissions, that will really impact sort of how your downstream use of that data is going to be either in compliance or not in compliance with what customers are asking. And when you do those subject access requests and they want to know, hey, how are you using my data, having this mapping figured out and having this on the right-hand side be a part of your metadata model and your metadata profile and becoming part of that active usage metadata of what's happening across your organization is going to be so huge in being able to really provide consumers what they're asking for, do it in a timely way, and know that when you're potentially audited by third parties or the Attorney General reaches out, that you're able to say, hey, no, we're doing this right, and we know we are because this is how we're doing this, and this is all the information that we've tracked.